Thanks for your intro. Appreciate it. Um, just trying to see here. I don't know how to. Oh, there's a chat piece.
Yeah. And Coach, what I'll do is if there's any questions that come up, I can reiterate it to you so you can kind of just
Yeah,
focus on your presentation.
perfect. Yeah, just ping me that way. I don't have some up here blocking the screen too.
Yes, sir.
Um, no, appreciate you having us on. This is very cool. Love the opportunity and love what's happening. So I'll jump into this. If you guys do have questions, like Coach said, just put in the chat. He can reiterate it. Also, normally I try and ask questions during this. It's a little bit harder doing that when we're on a webinar, but I'll try and go through this and make it as you easy to understand as possible, and I'll try and not go too fast. And I've got a lot to talk about in only an hour, and I can talk about this stuff for days. I saw that Coach Mason is on here, so he knows I've worked with him before. I can literally spend probably 5 or 6 hours just going over tackling, but we'll get through what we can, and then at the end we can ask questions. And you guys are more than welcome to reach out to me, especially during this time. I've got nothing to do other than hanging out with my kids and wife, and I'm sure they'll get sick of me eventually. So here we'll start going on. So what we're going to talk about today is just developing confidence in tackling. We'll go over some key pieces of. I'll go past that. So we'll go over just how the game has changed, what we're doing to address that. We'll talk about Atavus as a two-step process and what we're looking at. And then we'll discuss some of the concepts. So we'll discuss how we maximize power and control in contact, breaking down pre-contact and contact. And then we'll discuss a little bit about the drill variation. So what kind of drills we're running, how we run them in practice, and then the coach's role. And then we'll talk about the types of contact. And we'll just briefly go over types of contact. I think a lot of you already have an idea of what I'll be talking about there, but I do want to touch on it a little bit. So going through tackling just in general for Atavus, we started out as a rugby company. That was about 8 or 9 years ago is when I started, and we were brought in originally to teach rugby to the United States. As we went on, we started working with different high schools and different programs, and actually the Seahawks visited us and started bringing up tackling a lot. So, as we evolved as a company, we realized that, there was a whole marketplace of tackling that wasn't really tapped, and that was starting to get a lot more notice around the world. So we kind of shifted our focus from rugby, went to football. A couple of the employees have football backgrounds like myself, so I originally started playing football when I was young. I played for about 8 years, then got into rugby, played rugby all through college, and now play professionally here in Seattle. But we realized that, tackling is one of the most common transactions in the game of football, and it says that on there. The only other transaction that happens more than tackling is blocking, right? And so if you can get blocking and tackling down, that's how you win games. All right, so we wanted to take a look at how tackling works, and we started working with the Seahawks coaches, and I'm sure many of you have seen stuff about the hawk tackle, the different drills that they've done around that. We helped with that a little bit. We've helped them refine it. We'll talk about a little. We'll discuss why we have some issues with their hawk tackle, and how we've changed it over the last couple of years. But we'll go through that in a sec. Some of the things that we've seen is just a frequency of head contact in practicing games. Not so much just a concussion piece, which I know that's always on everybody's mind, is how many concussions are we getting, right? What's happening in the world of sports as far as concussions. But it also had to do with the necks and shoulders, right? So we were seeing a lot of players getting spine issues, stingers, dislocations in their shoulders because of the ways that they're tackling or they're training tackling. When we first started working, or when the hawk tackle first came out, a lot of the high schools that I went to were talking about how they were getting shoulder injuries, and it simply was because of the way that the hawk tackle portrayed tackling. they were bringing their arms too wide and they were doing a lot of rolling, which then was leading to some shoulder issues. And we'll discuss again why we don't want to get outside of our body and how we want to use our arms in the tackle that leads to that. But this just shows that, right, if we're not practicing properly, we're going to get different types of injuries because of the way that we're tackling. All right. So Atavus is built on two main concepts. We talk about shoulder-led tackling and then keeping the head out of contact. And one leads to the other, right? So if we're hitting with our shoulder, we're keeping our head out of contact. So when I work with kids and when I work at different high schools or even at the college level, I rarely ever talk about where your head goes. And the only reason that I do that is because of intent, right? So if I start working with a player and I say, all right, I want you to make sure you get your head behind. First thing that player is going to think of when he goes in a tackle is, where's my head? Right now, if I tell that same player, I want you to go hit that guy with your shoulder, now the intent is, okay, where's my shoulder at and how am I hitting somebody with it? So you can kind of understand what I'm talking about in that if our intent is, what am I doing with something, or if I'm being aggressive with my shoulder versus keeping my head out of it, all of a sudden it changes how our players are going to be using their body and be more in control. So here's some pieces that we're going to go over today. We'll talk about pre-contact and then the contact, and we'll break down each of these different zones as we go through. When we discuss contact, we'll go over, and these are some things that I'm going to talk about a lot, is how do we maximize our power and control, right? So we talk about making sure we have the same foot, same shoulder, how we punch in contact. When I was just talking about shoulder injuries, the hawk tackle, we didn't really see the punch as much come into those videos, and we'll discuss why that's so important. And then in pre-contact, we'll talk about having controlled movements to maximize our contact. And as we go through this, again, you're going to hear me use the words power and control a lot. And when you do your drills and when you talk about tackling with your players, make sure that everything you talk about always comes back to those two things. Because if I have power and I have control, I'm going to be an effective and I'm going to be a dominant tackler. So here's just a look at what we're looking at, or what we're trying to achieve. Right? We want a player coming in. If they're using their right shoulder, right foot comes into the ground. We're keeping our head out of contact. Right, keeping our head in a neutral position as we make contact, and then driving through the player. And then as coaches, we'll discuss this at the end a little bit, is making sure that we're evaluating the tackle properly, or have a way of evaluating the tackle. So we're identifying types of tackles, and we'll discuss that. Creating a universal language so that all of your players are speaking the same language, which I'm sure many of you already do. Having your players understand what kind of situation they're in so they know what kind of tackle to make, and that they can do that on instinct rather than having to think about it. And then understanding how we want to analyze our tackles and then label those. So before we get into the actual technique, it's important to understand what kind of situation we're in. So this is a tool that we use at Atavus to talk about what kind of situation players are in. So you can see it's broken into positive and negative. Positive being that I have the ability to knock a guy backwards, right? So I can hit someone and they'll go towards their own goal line. In negative situation, we're basically chasing after the guy or hitting someone sideways. We no longer have the ability to knock them backwards, but we want to bring them down as fast as possible. So in positive situations, we look at profile and angle. Both of these we can be dominant, meaning knocking that guy back. We have power and control. Profile tackles are directly in front of us. Angles are to the sides. So here's an example of a profile tackle, or positive tackle, sorry. It's going to be an angle tackle. Stays in front of him, adjusts the movement, right? And you can see that if he was putting his shoulder in, if this was a live drill, he could knock that guy backwards. Here it is in a game. All right, so we're just looking for players to keep guys in front, drive forward, and knock that guy back towards their own end zone. Negative situations, we're looking to maintain control, right? So we want to get control of the runner, bring him down as fast as possible. So these are what we consider lateral or chase. I'll touch on rolling a little bit as we go through. So a lot of programs we've worked with have talked about either, lawnmower tackles to the side. So a roll tackle, a gator roll, a hawk roll, all of these different things. For Atavus, we don't necessarily label tackles as roll tackles. Rolling is what we consider an outcome of poor tracking or poor contact, right? I doubt any of you as coaches have looked at your player on the sideline and said, okay, I want you to go roll that guy, right? It's just not something that we would necessarily do. Now, I want you to go hit that guy and bring him down as fast as possible. Now, if he beats you to the outside, you may have to roll because you've lost the leverage. But if I hit a guy in a lateral position, I want to end up on top of him, right? In a chase tackle even, I want to end up on top, right? I don't want to have to be pulling. And the reason that we don't necessarily teach the roll tackle is because when we start teaching players to roll, we start emphasizing the wrong parts of our body, right? And we'll talk about that more as we go through, but just to touch on a little bit, if I'm hitting a guy with my right shoulder and I decide I want to roll, and I've taught a player to roll, then they're going to put emphasis on their left side, right? Because they want to roll behind them and bring them down quickly, right? The problem with that is now if I start putting emphasis on my left side too early, I may allow that guy to pull out of the tackle, okay? I want to put emphasis on my right shoulder because that's the one that's making contact. And if we roll, then it's an outcome of the fact that I didn't get there in time or I didn't put my body in the right position, okay? So here's a negative tackle, and I'll show it in a game as well. I know that negative has a poor connotation when you first hear it. We just put that as a situation just because it's behind you. A lot more often in games, especially now, we see player or teams be in negative situations. A common thing for most of the clients that we work with, right, is for them to be anywhere between 60 to 7% negative, and then 30 to 40% positive, right? So we spend a lot more of our time, and I'll show this one more time. We spend a lot more of our time in negative situations simply because of the way the game's played. That's not to say you can't have that flipped. You may have teams that simply like to run at the core, and so you're constantly in profile or angle tackles, but this is a lot of what we see. Now, when you look at that tackle again, right, we're not seeing the guy roll. Again, he doesn't wrap, which we may ding him when we would grade, but he does a good job of getting his shoulder in, so he does a great job here. But he's stuck in a negative position, right? We don't want him to put emphasis on this left shoulder. We want it to be on that right shoulder, and if he does that, then this is the outcome that we get. Right now, if he was looking to roll that guy, we may end up with a different issue because he puts emphasis on the other side. And again, this is what we'll be going over. All right, we're just going to go into our technique pieces. We'll talk about drills and then our levels of contact. So first thing we're going to break down is just our contact zone. We talk about this in a two-step process or a two-part process, right, of pre-contact and contact. Obviously, pre-contact is going to come first in just about every situation. The reason we're going to talk about contact first is because I like to discuss it in the way that I teach it. So when I work with especially freshmen, sophomore, high school athletes, guys who maybe haven't done a ton of sports, right, are still learning how to move their body, I'll always start in the contact zone first. Reason being is I want them to be comfortable with actual body-on-body contact before we get them moved away, right? I don't want to put them 5 yards away and make them go tackle somebody when they don't even understand how to get their body low yet. So going into this, we'll talk about these three different contact keys. So we have our body position, to maximize power, our strike, which is power and control, and then our finish, which is about maintaining power and control. When we discuss these, each one of these elements happens simultaneously, right? And this is going to be different from pre-contact a little bit in how we talk about this, but all of these things happen at the same time, right? So we want our body position to be low, powerful. We want to be able to strike, and we want to be able to finish. So our feet should be moving as we're striking, right? As we're in a low body position. Now, when I coach this, I want it to be perfect, right? I want them to have good body position. We can coach each one of these keys individually. We can coach them together. We want them to be, as best as they can. Reason being is because once we get into the actual game of football, it's chaos, right? There's so many things happening that our players have to react to a lot of different scenarios. So as long as they can get 2 of those 3 things correct, then they're usually going to end up with a positive tackle or a good tackle. And what I'm talking about is if I have a good body position, I have a good strike. So I'm low, I'm hitting hips, my shoulder's going in, I've got a good punch, so creating a wrap, but maybe I'm not running my feet, probably going to bring that guy down within a yard, right? Or it still may be a dominant hit, even though I'm not finishing. If I get a good strike and I'm running my feet, even though I'm high, I might still be able to get a good tackle. And that happens all the time to D linemen, right? We're on a block, all of a sudden the ball carrier is in our space, and all I've done is shift my body over, and he's hitting me in the chest. But let's say I get a good strike and my feet are running, now I'm still going to get good contact. I just saw there was a message. I don't know how to open that.
That was me, Coach. I was just letting them know the chat was open.
Oh, okay. Cool. Yeah, if anybody has questions through this, feel free to write in there. All right, and this is what we're looking for, right? We want a player to keep their feet moving, to be in a low, powerful, controlled position, striking with the shoulder. We'll talk about same foot, same shoulder, coming off the toe, and then striking with a good wrap and finish. So body position first. When we talk about body position, we want to maximize our power. So we want to be in a good body position. And what I mean by that is we want to be bent at the hips, right? We want to be in a position where our head's still up. We're in a neutral. We have a neutral neck. And what I mean by neutral neck again is if any of you guys are power lifters or work with strength and conditioning coaches, now they'll be able to tell you more about that. I know that when I was taught how to squat or how to power clean or any of those things, they used to always tell me to look at the ceiling. So we would constantly be craning our necks looking up, which now we know that that's not necessarily what we want to have happen if we want to be in our strongest position. Strength coaches will tell you when we squat that we want to keep our head facing forward, but we want our eyes to look up, right? So looking through the eyebrows, if that helps you, not necessarily you have to do it. But in football, that's something that we can do. We can be in a low position and we can keep our head neutral, but we want to be, and I usually say, look at the eyebrows or look over the sunglasses, right? So that our eyes are still up, but our head's still in a neutral spot. We're not craning our necks one way or the other. Reason being is the moment that we put our head super high, all of a sudden now we're telling our body that we're in a poor position, and it's sending signals saying that we're not strong and we're not going to be able to be tense. Okay, so we're not going to be in a powerful position. Also, if we get hit like that, we put our spine in a bad position. Same thing with too low. We want to have an effective pad level and then our hips below our shoulders. We don't ever want to see a guy bent over all the way. And one thing that I've worked with a lot of programs and I've seen is every now and then I come to a program that talks about hitting hips, right? We want to hit hips, we want to go eyes to thighs, which is great, right? We want to have those things happen. But if all of a sudden we get a player who's 6'5", who's going against a guy who's 5'9", right? I doubt that guy's going to be able to get low enough to be able to hit thighs, right? So we have to be able to adjust based on that. That's a person who can probably hit that runner in the chest and be just fine, right? He's got the mass behind him. They're probably going to be a powerful player. So If they are in a comfortable position, so, and then that's where we talk about effective pad level. If I can hit somebody in the chest, but I'm in a comfortable position and I'm striking with that near foot, near shoulder, I'm probably going to be able to be dominant because I'm going to be powerful. Okay, it's when we put ourselves into a poor position by trying to get to a position where we're not comfortable that we're going to be, one, unsafe, and two, ineffective in our tackle. So keeping our eyes up, right, neutral neck, right? You see this player, he turns his head just a little bit. You just see that little movement, but he keeps it within the shoulders and he stays strong. And then our hips always below our shoulders, right? As we're making contact. I usually like to talk about hitting on a rise almost. We can hit going forward, but we want to be more of an airplane taking off rather than an airplane landing. Okay, when we talk about the strike, this is about maximizing power and control. So we want to have simultaneous shoulder and punch contact. And what that means is I want to be striking with my shoulder, and at the same time, I want to be punching with my arm. Okay, and this is where we differ a little bit, or they don't talk about it enough when I think of the hawk tackle and those. We want to keep our hands like a boxer, right? If I can get my hands in a position where they're tight, where my elbows are tight, and I'm close into my body, I'm going to be in a strong position to be able to hit and drive my arm through to create control. Okay, and I'm not saying that as a player you should run around with your arms next to your chest all the time and be in a box position. I'm just saying that when you're within 1 to 2 yards of making contact, players should have their hands come up and be tight and ready to go and punch into contact. So some visual cues that you want to look at there is making sure that the players have square shoulders. So if they hit and all of a sudden you see them turn, it means that they didn't necessarily punch their shoulder through, they didn't jab. They want their hands up and elbows in. And then as you make contact, you want your hips over your knees. So you can see this player here, he's just punching his arm through. He's looking to get past the ball carrier. That way he's driving that arm as deep as possible as he makes contact so he can get a good wrap. And this leads into a little bit of our strike timing. When I talk about strike timing, this is where our hips and knee ratio is. So I like to use the example of Earl Thomas and Cam Chancellor just because I'm in Seattle and Seahawks fan. These are two guys who have massive highlight reels where they have huge hits and they absolutely crush people. But what they don't often show is how spectacularly they miss people. Earl Thomas, for instance, is one of the worst people at launching his body. And so what you see here is early strike timing, which if our hips are in front of our knees, like here, we have a ton of power in our contact, right? We can be explosive, we're going through, but we now don't have any more control over our body. So if we launch too early and that player steps to the inside, all of a sudden we don't have the ability to adjust our angle, right? So what this leads to a lot of times is missed tackles or an exposure to injury simply because a player is launched. Let's say he launches early, player steps into the head position, and that player may have dropped their head, and now they're getting full weight of that body directly into their head. Right, so there's a couple things that can happen there that we see. So here's an example of early strike timing. A player striking too early. So we just watched this player here. He's going to leave his feet. Because of that, timing's just slightly off. He can't get his arm through, right? And he doesn't make good shoulder contact. Now the other side of that is late strike timing. So this one is even worse in my opinion, because now our hips are behind our knees. And what this does is you have very little to no power in contact simply because all of your weight is on that front foot or not on that front foot, on the middle of your body, right? Because your hips are behind your knee. So you can't transfer your weight easily. And then you're usually going to allow extra yards. So you may make the tackle, but this is where I like to say that the player is more of the nail instead of the hammer, right? We're letting guys hit us rather than going to hit them. So here's an example. Player comes up, he stops his feet, which is the first issue, but because of that, his hips are now behind his knees, and he has no power in contact, and he's just taking full forceless hit. So again, he makes a tackle, but in a profile situation, he's given up 2 to 3 yards, which for us is considered a poor tackle. Right? We want to be dominant in our hit. And we've seen that video already. Okay, and the last but not least is our finish in the contact zone. And this is where we just want to maximize, or we want to maintain that power and control that we've already created. So by having a good body position, by having a good strike, we've created those things. Now we want to maintain it and end the tackle. This means we want to have an aggressive wrap with leg drive. So we want to see players really punch that arm across, right? Create that control, get that other arm through, wrap them up, and then keep their legs running to bring them to the ground. So this is a drill this is live. Both players are at a slow speed. So he's able to make the tackle simply because of the fact that he's bigger and the guy's just walking. But if you look at this, right, his hips are behind his knee. If this player was running at him, he'd be in a lot worse position, right? But I'm going to show another drill later on, and we'll talk about what we see here. So just watch this guy's body position, remember it, or body language. Okay, he gets hit, goes down, right? But we're not going to be as powerful as we would be if we were coming off the toe. And I'll show some examples of that in a second. So pre-contact. So for Atavus, one of the things that we realize is we need to break down the different levels or the different parts of pre-contact, not necessarily pre-contact as a whole, but each piece of it, right? So we have different zones. So we start grading a tackler from the moment that they could become part of the tackle, right? So the evaluation zone for us is basically a player figuring out that they need to be part of the tackle. Are they reading the play right? Are they able to get there? And I mean, this should be everybody on your defense, right? If they're not all trying to make the tackle, then they probably should be on the sideline with you. So we want to make sure that they're reading the play and they start moving towards the tackle. So this is in our closing space area. We want to take away any options that the runner has. Next piece is our decision zone, and this is where we're deciding how's the best way to get to the tackle. So this is our leverage, right? Are we watching hips? Are we being able to force the runner to where we want them to go? And then the last one is our action zone. And this is where we have our footwork, when we're talking about that same foot, same shoulder, and then a power step into contact and how our feet are in the contact point. And when we talked about contact earlier, those were all simultaneous. For contact or for pre-contact, this is all sequential. So all of these things happen one after the other. Okay? We always are closing space, we always have leverage, and then footwork. And for those of you that are D-line coaches or work with a D-line, right, closing space may not necessarily be moving forward, but it is beating our blocker. So it's our reaction, right? Are we able to get past that guy? So if we don't have good closing space, we're not going to have good leverage or good footwork. If we don't have good leverage, then we're probably not going to have good footwork, right? So they all roll into each other, okay? And you'll see that as your season goes on. Say you have a team that has poor closing space, right? You're not going to see very many leverage and footwork issues simply because you're not even getting there, right? Or you may see a bunch of closing space and leverage issues, right? As this gets fixed, right, you'll start seeing more leverage issues because your players are getting there, right? So now players are getting there, but now they're not maintaining good leverage, right? Now as your leverage gets better, so closing space is good, leverage is good, you'll start seeing more issues around footwork because now your players are getting into the contact area. Okay. All right, so closing space. All right, we want to be making sure that we're closing space continuously, right? And that what that means is that we're always moving forward. Right? I want to see my players constantly on the balls of their feet. If they go to their heels, then we have a problem. Yeah, we want to limit the options and we want to minimize preventable yards. Now, normally I would ask the room about what preventable yards are. I'm not necessarily going to pull up a chat to ask that question, but for us, a preventable yard is the yards that we give up by not closing down the space, right? So it's not the yards that we give up within the tackle. It's the yards that are all pre-contact. So if I have a player that's 10 yards away from me and I stay on my spot and let that guy come to me, make the tackle. So let's say I make an effective tackle, bring him down. I've given up 10 yards, right? Effectively. If I go, let's say I close 5 yards because that's what I should be able to close in the amount of time, right? So I close 5 yards, meet him halfway. I make a poor tackle, so I give up 2. Now they've gained 7, right? So in one scenario, yes, I made the tackle and it was effective, but in the other scenario, it was poor. But one is the difference between a first down and not a first down. Okay, so we always want to be closing space and making sure that we're taking that away. And then our keys are making sure that we're identifying our targets and then reacting to obstacles. So here's an example of poor closing space. Okay, we'll see this guy make contact, right? He closed down for a little bit, but then he stopped his feet and he still got him. But let's see this guy against, let's say, a better runner. So again, player comes forward, but he stops his feet. Because he stopped his feet, he isn't able to maintain leverage. And all of a sudden, now he's chasing after the guy. Okay, and just a little bit faster, right? So because his feet are stopped, he isn't able to react to movement. And now that runner's by him. Again, same thing. Does initially a good job of closing space, but then he stops his feet. Because he stops and goes to his heels, it goes to what we talked about, the hips being behind the knee, right? And now we're waiting for that guy to come hit us rather than us to go hit him. And here's a good example, right? Watch this player, closes really well, stays on the balls of his feet, changes his speeds. Now, that's something we'll talk about a little bit in the drills. But if you watch here, right, we want our players to be able to change their footwork and change the speed of their feet, right? So if we're closing, watch how he closes fast and then he slows his feet down to be able to then react to that runner's movements. We're just always moving forward. This takes away those runner's options, keeps going forward. Leverage, right? And this one's about controlling the direction of the runner. We want to take the most effective path to maximize contact. So when I talk about pre-contact, right, I talked about dictating the space, right? So a lot of the times when I watch high school film, what we see a lot of the time, especially in linebackers and DBs, if they're not confident or they're unsure of a play or maybe they're not ready, all sorts of things, we'll see them react, right? So they're reacting based upon the runner, right? So, and we see this a lot, especially if there's 10 yards of space, right? If there's 10 yards of space in front of us and there's a runner, I start reacting to what the ball carrier does because I want to see where he goes and that way I can then go and make the tackle. We want to eliminate that kind of mindset, right? Our mindset should be that on defense, we dictate what the runner is going to do. So if I'm in a one-on-one situation with that ball carrier, I want to force him to go where I want him to go. So I can do that by closing space, which takes away the amount of room that they have and forces them to make decisions earlier. And then what kind of leverage I have. So what I'm looking at is, can I get a near shoulder leverage? So if I'm in a profile situation, I choose a shoulder. If I'm in angle, I go the direction that he's going. So if he's to my right, I would want to put him on my right shoulder and force him to either continue going right, which then allows me to make a right shoulder tackle, or to cut back, in which case he's cutting back into me. This is also the only time that I ever talk about where your head goes in a way. So when we talk about near hip leverage, I'm looking at that player's hip because that's what's telling me where he's going to go. And then I want my head to be behind, right? So reason being is if I'm watching the hip and that player's to the right side of me, I'm looking to make contact with my right shoulder. Okay, because if I look to make contact with my left shoulder and that player cuts back, all that's left to stop him is my arm, if that, right? But if I'm looking at that hip with my head behind, right, and I'm looking to make right shoulder contact and he cuts back, he's cutting back into my entire body, which is perfect. If he continues on, then great. I'm making sure that with my right shoulder, or they're running out of bounds. Okay, so that's what we're looking at near hip. Right, if you ever see a player get cut back on, right, and he completely misses that tackle, that's a near hip issue. The other one is what we consider a good angle. Okay, I usually use the example of a D lineman. If you guys can see my mouse here, right? How many times have you seen a D lineman run towards the ball carrier and then kind of do this kind of thing where he just loops around and then goes and makes tackle? Right. Reason being is they've sprinted to get there, but they didn't adjust to the speed that guy is, or how fast that quarterback is, the running back, whatever. And now they're chasing after him because they've closed too quickly, and all of a sudden that guy's gone to the outside. Right. We want to understand that if I'm a D lineman, which I was a D lineman, right, 280 pounds going against a guy who's 185, 195 soaking wet. And he's probably going to be a bit quicker than I am. So I don't want to necessarily sprint because I have a lot of mass to stop to try and change my angle. So I'll probably slow my feet, keep that player in front of me, and then make contact as we go. Or wait for my help to get there, right? And I'll show some examples. Some of the things that we look at are mimicking movements. So if that player is sprinting, then I should probably be sprinting. If they're starting to chop their feet and slow down, then I need to change my speed so that I'm ready for any type of cutback or movement change. And then making shoulder contact. Leverage, if a player rolls, right, it's usually because we've had bad leverage and we don't make shoulder contact. We're making contact with the arm, or we're chasing after somebody and grabbing a hold of them. So here's a couple of examples of poor leverage. I'll show a back angle here in a sec. So we can see a player has left shoulder leverage here, but because he's already stopped his feet, right, he's not able to adjust. And I mean, in a positive position, especially when it's close to profile, I'm a big believer in that you can switch shoulders based upon the distance. But so say if you're more right shoulder dominant, which as a player, I prefer hitting with my right shoulder. It's just, I mean, that is something that I've discovered in myself as I've played throughout the years. So if I'm in a position where that player is, say, 5 yards away and he's on my left, I may put myself in position to be where I can make contact with my right because I know he's going to be running straight towards me and I can make that contact and it might be better. That doesn't necessarily mean that I can't hit with my left. I just prefer one over the other. But in this situation, right, this player already has left shoulder leverage. So he should maintain that by going forward. Now, if that player makes a move and goes to his right, he needs to be able to adjust. But because his feet are already flat, he doesn't have that ability, and now he's reaching. So here's an example of near hip. And near hip is often a time, is often seen when players are uncomfortable with speed, or they think that the guy's a lot faster than they are. So what you'll see a lot of the time is the tackler will go to where they think the ball carrier will be, so they'll get ahead of him, which you can see here. He goes ahead of him because he thinks that's where the contact will be made, and because his head's in front, he's tracking with his left shoulder. That guy's able to cut back. Okay, footwork. Last one here. Okay, when we talk about footwork, it's about maintaining an effective base. And what I mean by that is we want our feet to never get outside of our shoulders, right? So we want them about hip width to shoulder width at most, right? Reason being is the further that we get away from the midline of our body, the weaker we get and the harder it is for us to move. Just for example, with our body, when we talked about punching earlier, I like to see how long, if you take two guys, right, how long one can hold a dumbbell outside of his body versus somebody holding it close to their chest. Right? I guarantee the guy holding it close to his chest is going to win that battle every single time. Okay, so same thing with our feet, right? We want to make sure our feet are within the midline of our body. Okay, we can hold ourselves up a lot better if they're shoulder width apart versus outside of our shoulders and out wide. Okay, especially on the balls of our feet. And then we want to be able to have a good power step to transfer weight and momentum. This is one that we see taught different ways all over. A lot of what I see coaches talk about, especially when they're first starting to work on the same shoulder, same foot, or same foot, same shoulder, is they want to get their foot as close to the ball carrier as possible. This is something that we don't necessarily recommend. Reason being is when we get our foot as close as possible to the ball carrier, all of our weight is now on that foot that's close, and it's going to be flat-footed, okay, because we're reaching with our feet. Our body isn't meant to be that close than someone else's and be able to be in a good body position, right? So what I talk about is we want to be pushing off, driving off of that foot about 1 yard to 1.5 yards away from the ball carrier, right? And this allows us to be in a good position. And you can see it here. So watch this player on the right, especially. And we talked about that drill earlier where the guy had a poor finish, right? So watch this guy's body language as he gets hit. And it's really good off of this one. So see how far this guy's foot is away. So he's about 1 yard before, or where his foot is as he's making contact, right? He's not into the person's body. He's driving off the foot, so he's making contact. And a good way to train this, and you can talk about it with your players, is have them just lean up against each other, right? You should be at a point where you're almost falling over, right? We want to have enough control that we can correct ourselves, but we want to be to the point where our feet should be far enough where I'd almost tip over if someone pushed me from behind. Okay, and again, just watch this guy's body language when we go full speed. See, their heels are up, they're driving forward, right? Our hips are either over our knee or in front of it. But that body position there, right, or that body language, we could see was much different than that drill that was live earlier, right? This guy is head whips forward, right? He has to control himself, and this is him flexing. We've told him that he's going to be hit. So that's a powerful strike there, and that's what we're looking for. Here's a player who does a great job just maintaining good leverage, gets his right foot in the ground, makes contact. And that's what we're looking for. All right, so just to go back to these, right? Tracking or pre-contact is all sequential, right? One happens after the other, and then contact is all simultaneous. We want to have good body position, finish and strike all at the same time, or at least get 2 out of the 3 within the tackle. All right, I'm going to speed through these ones because I want to make sure you guys have time for questions. All right, so when we talk about drills, we break them up into 3 different categories. And this is a way for us to make sure our players are progressing properly and that they understand the skills. So I'll break down each one of these as we go. So technical drills are ones that we consider are coach directed. So they have complete focus on power and safety. And as a coach, we have full control over what's happening in the drill, which means that I'm telling a player which direction they're going. I'm telling the player what body part they're using and what I expect to have happen. So we should have 90 to 100% success in each one of these drills. And these are drills where, right, if I'm telling a player, all right, the offensive guy is going to go to his left. So as a as a defensive player, you're going to be hitting with your right. So that means I want to see you hit with the right shoulder, with your right foot in the ground, and it should happen in the same way every single time, right? Maybe the first two, you have to make some corrections, but after that, we should always see the same result. So again, going back to this drill.
Here's an example of effective timing and footwork.
So this is one where this is just our strike timing drill. Players are 5 yards apart. I've told everybody what's going to happen. So defense knows that they're going left, or offense knows that they're going left. Defense knows that they're hitting with their right shoulder. Okay, and we're just working on getting our foot in the ground, making sure we're having good footwork into contact. All right, everybody knows what's going to happen. Okay, again, this is
facing the defense.
This one is what we call our close angle drill. So we have a ball carrier or a defender here, ball carrier in the blue cone. As soon as the defense crosses this line, the ball carrier is allowed to leave. In this one, we're just going at a jogging pace. He might be running a little faster than that. But what I want to see is the offensive player get to that cone, and he's just his job is to just stay straight. Defensive guy, just make contact and show that you can take a good angle and make contact before he reaches that cone. Okay. Next one is decision making. In this, we're looking at coach and player engagement. So what I mean by that is we're asking questions rather than just telling. We give the defense 1 to 2 options, and that way now we're giving the ball carrier 1 to 2 options, so now the defense has to make decisions based upon what's happening. We're looking for about 70 to 80% success, so that means we want the players to fail a little bit, but for the most part, they're getting it right or executing. So here's just one example of what we consider decision making. As you can see here, this is just our leverage drill. So we have 2 defensive players in black here, right? Their job is to keep this offensive guy in between them. Offensive player, he can go left and right. He can't go past this line. He's just going left and right. It's just a mirror drill. And the idea is that, these guys can maintain their fit. Okay, but we want to make sure to give those guys options, and now we're having to react a little bit more to the ball carrier. And the last one is our game-based drills. So these ones are all player-centered. So what we're looking at is, can players execute the skill we've been working on in a game-like situation? So we create multiple options, make it, a game. So there's either points or there's a winner and a loser. We want to see about 60 to 7% success. We want them winning enough that that they gain some confidence, but they're losing so that they learn, right? If they start losing where they're getting discouraged, so they're losing every single time, then there's an issue with the player's understanding of that skill, and we need to go back to either decision-making or technical. We want to make sure in these types of drills, we let the players play, and we want to ask open-ended questions. So what I mean by open-ended questions is something like, what went wrong, like it's on the screen there, or what can you do better next time, or what can you do to win this game, right? So we start asking the player and try and get them to critically think about what happened in the drill so that they can give us answers that relate back to the skill. That's what we want to see, right? We want to start asking players questions, and they give us the answers and basically the feedback that we'd be giving them. So here's an example. Hold on a sec. Here's an example of a drill where it's just what we call a 1v1 cone drill. Offensive player has a bunch of cones in front of him, usually 4 or 5. on the go, he's going to go around there and try and get to this line. Defensive player has another set of cones on the scoring line. He has to go around that one and then basically go get the ball carrier before he gets to his line. So the great thing about this drill, that drill is it changes every single time, right? We're going to see lots of different outcomes. We're going to see lots of different situations. Could be positive, could be negative, and you can change it based upon where you put the cones too. This one is a little bit more advanced. Now we're doing a 2v2 cone drill. So ball carrier is going to leave. As soon as he crosses or gets around a cone, this guy here is our blocker. So he can go and he's going to get in front of one of these defensive players. So there, we may ask this guy here, okay, what went wrong? Or what could he have done better in this scenario? Which hopefully we'd hear, Coach, I should have closed space and forced this guy to go out because he's already running at me, right? I want to be able to make contact there because if he kept on going forward, right, he would have had nowhere to go. But the great thing about drills like this is, again, nobody knows what the others are doing. Both defensive players don't know who's going around which cone. Blocker, nobody knows who the blocker is going to. And then the ball carrier is going to go around a different cone every time to create different scenarios. And then making sure to be flexible with these drills. So we like to give tackle plans. So a list of drills to work on throughout that week, or specific drills to do in a day for your circuit. But it's important to be able to change them based upon the things that you're seeing, rather than just running a drill because it's one that you want to run. Making sure that your players are progressing through it rather than just repeating things, and then that they're constantly challenged and they're not getting discouraged. So those are where we're talking about. We want to see their rates of success. So in certain ones, we want to see 70% success because we want them to be challenged enough that they're not discouraged, but they're constantly getting better, and they can lose sometimes, right? Other ones, we want them to lose because we want to see what their biggest issues are. A lot of times I'll go into a high school team and we may run a drill. We have one that's similar to the 1v1 cone drill, but rather than back to back, they're facing each other and going around a cone, right? We may do that just so I can see, okay, how are players closing space? So if we're losing every single time, players might get discouraged, but that gives you as a coach talking points to go over, okay, we're not closing space well. This is why we're running these technique drills, rather than just going straight into the fundamentals and them getting bored of running the same drill over and over again, right? We want to constantly challenge them. And then quickly, I'll just touch on these. Our levels of contact is we have 4. Basically, we have palms down, which instead of tagging off with our palms up and just hitting hips, we do palms down because if players make contact with hips with palms down, it automatically brings their body profile lower. And as a coach, when I see my defensive player do that, I can see that they can make the tackle rather than just reaching and touching. They're not getting any better, and they're going to start creating bad habits if they're doing that too often. Dino strike we use, which is basically just a shoulder hit without the punch. And I'll do some video real quick of those. Oh, nope, not on there. So Dino strike is without the punch, and this is one that's usually half speed. We use it as just a training. So if you're doing a drill for the first time that you want to have contact in, we may run it this way 2 or 3 times just to make sure players are comfortable and they understand it. Or if you have players who are coming back from injury and you don't want them going live or even thud, then this is a great example. What I'll do oftentimes is have the player, instead of just striking with the shoulder, I'll have them put their hands up like they would and then use their hands as a cushion. So they're hitting with their shoulder, but they're just pushing off, right? So instead of just making contact with the shoulder, they're hitting with their hands in front of their shoulder and then giving like a little shove, right? Then thud, so everything in contact other than the finish. And finally live, which is all aspects of the tackle. Okay, and then just making sure that we vary our drills based upon our players progressing, right? So if we're doing fundamentals, right, then we go to decision making, game based. Sometimes I'll start with game based again, so that way I can see how players are reacting and doing different skills, and that tells me if we need to do certain fundamental drills or decision making drills. And this is something that this is our programming, so what we look at through a year. So if we're working with a team, this may be something that we do to work on their tackling. Right. So at Atavus, we have all the stuff that you guys talked about, or that I just talked about with technique, but also we have the actual consulting piece where we'll work with programs to make sure that their tackling is improving throughout the year. And that's it. Does anybody have any questions? Open up the floor. I know I've done a lot of talking.
Yeah, guys, feel free to ask any questions in here. I know, where's the chat at? Coach Hopper had posted just a discount code if anybody was interested. So it's also available in the chat. So you guys want to take a look at that. But definitely, if anybody has any questions, feel free to throw it in the chat. And while they're doing that, Coach, do you want to just share your like Twitter handle or a way they can get in contact with you if they have any other questions?
Yeah. So I'll just write in this chat here too. Can you review the hips behind the knees portion? Yeah, absolutely. So when we talk about hips behind the knees, our hip and knee positioning is what develops our strike timing, right? So if our hips are behind our knees, and you can do this if you're just in a room too, think about like if you're sitting in a chair, right? We're not necessarily in a power position. We have to move forward in order to get up, right? There's a lot of momentum that has to be created because of that. Now, if I'm leaning against a wall, right, and my shoulders on it, and my hips are over my knee, right, I can be powerful. I can push, right. So we want to be in a position when we make contact where we're able to drive, right. So I should be in a position where, as I make contact, my hips should be over the top of my knee or beyond that, right. And that's what I'm talking about. Is I want to be driving off my toe, and then make sure, and then as a coach, what we're looking for then is, as they're driving off that toe, are their hips over their knees or their hips beyond their knees? Does that make sense? Those are our indicators to tell us, are our players powerful in contact or being powerful? And a lot of times if you're seeing guys get run over, it's because their hips are going to be behind their knees.
Cool. Anybody else? Last minute questions? Thumbs up there. Good deal. Good deal. Well, Coach, I thank you so much for spending the time with us. And, I'm sure, with the contact information that you supplied, you'll be getting hit up about questions that come to guys later on and whatnot. So Coach just dropped his Twitter handle in there. Make sure you follow him and reach out to him in regards to this system. And if anybody had any questions about the presentation, but we really appreciate you coming down and spending time with us and enlightening us on Atavus and the system and what you guys are doing. So really appreciate it, Coach.
Thanks for having me.
Absolutely. Anytime.